Hi, I'm Heidi, and my life's work is to help solve climate change. And I believe that as a climate person, one of the most important things I can do right now is help raise the alarm about big tech AI. And it's not just about water and electricity use. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Now, before you pro-AI people come for me, I want to say that I'm not anti-AI. I worked in tech, both in software and in climate tech, and I believe that technology is not inherently good or bad, but it matters who it actually benefits, who gets to make decisions, and how it's built and deployed. I've even told climate people that it's possible to cause harm while solving climate change. Over the past year, I've been increasingly concerned when I hear big tech CEOs telling us that we need to build AI as fast as possible because one day it may solve climate change. I think this framing is sleight of hand and it's greenwashing, but it works. From what I've seen in climate circles, I don't think we have a clear stance on AI. And to be honest, there are really good use cases for machine learning and AI applications for solving climate change. But the spoiler alert is, it's not these generative AI chatbots. I mean, if you think about it, why would a tool that can do everything from generate recipes to showing your family as Charlie Brown characters be able to solve climate change? They're basically sucking up the entire internet, which contains tons of stuff that has nothing to do with solving climate change. I hope the 3 months of research that I put into this video will help serve as a resource to the climate community, the many busy people who are working on solving climate change every day, who probably haven't had the time to really dig into what's going on in AI, and hope it brings some clarity to those who are concerned about AI's impact on climate. I also want to raise the alarm because things are moving way faster than I think any of us really realize. I think that by and large, when I talk to climate people, they have heard the environmental impacts of AI are bad, but simultaneously hearing that AI can do good for climate change. And so we're not really sure how to square that. The muddiness, in my opinion, I feel like is just allowing these big tech CEOs to do whatever they want. And maybe that muddiness is intentional. It's certainly benefiting them. First of all, anyone who's worth their salt in the climate space, no, there's no such thing as a silver bullet for climate change. It's such a complicated and widespread issue that there needs to be many different solutions. So when I hear AI executives say it's going to solve climate change, it's a red flag for me. Mostly because I feel like the negative effects are very present, and to hear them say that sounds like they're just justifying this sort of unfettered proliferation of their technologies because one day it might do good. Also, we already know the solution to climate change. We need to reduce our emissions and eventually go to net zero and remove the emissions already in the atmosphere. These are not technological problems, they're social and political problems. And now, those chasing the power of the dollar are once again telling us we need to actually extend the amount of fossil fuels we are using, and we need to just accept that they're going to build out these new things, AI chatbots, building massive data centers that are football fields big. Oh, and by the way, we should also just ignore the negative side effects, because ultimately, apparently, they will solve climate change. Throughout my research, I've been very heartened to see that there are AI people who really get it. There's a group, for instance, called Climate Change AI, who wrote this paper in 2022 called Tackling Climate Change with Machine Learning. And even in that paper, they emphasized that climate change is not a pure technological problem. And even if we were to get utility out of ChatGPT, which I think there will be, some benefits in the climate space for it, is it really worth the massive potential negative downsides? I think if we were able to help direct this industry to build the best version of itself, the one that's not let's build as fast as possible because we need to compete with each other, but one that is truly beneficial for local communities and really focused on solving the problems that they purport to, that is a vision of AI that I can get behind. Instead, it sounds like, to me, they're invoking these real existential problems of our age because it helps them look like they can save us, and we should just ignore any negative externalities. By the way, on the way to build those data centers, they're partnering with the military, they're ignoring their own safety teams, and they're even extending the use of fossil fuels globally. Indeed, we actually see that OpenAI used to have a stance on not working with the military, and they've since walked it back quietly. And on its face, it could look like they're just competing like any other kind of Silicon Valley industry, but they're actually competing to build superintelligence, which some people in their industry don't even really believe is possible, and certainly not anytime soon. And these companies purport to be the ones who can build the most ethical version of superintelligence, and so they need to get ahead before anyone else. That is a savory mentality that we've seen play out before in Silicon Valley that I hope would raise alarm bells for you, because no one man or no one company should have all that power, and who's to say that they are truly going to build the most ethical thing. It is, to me, a very powerful tool to pump out Kool-Aid and hype, which is, of course, one of Silicon Valley's most successful products time and time again. Okay, before we really get started, we really need definitions. I think this is actually one of the main reasons why we can't distinguish between the good, helpful AI and the type of harmful AI, because everything is AI. If you take anything away from this video, I want you to know that the type of AI and machine learning tools that we know can help us solve climate change right now is not these big chatbots and the generative AI tools that we're used to. I'm going to call this type of AI big tech AI. They have 3 distinct attributes. First is that they suck up massive amounts of data, like the whole internet, to feed their large language models, LLMs. The reason why they need all that data is because their general purpose. They don't serve a targeted use case. They want to be able to answer everything. And third, they're building hyperscale data centers. These are a totally different level of data center than we've had traditionally, and they use these for both training models and inference, which is end user use. Traditional data centers consume about 10 to 25 megawatts, and hyperscale data centers can consume 100 megawatts up to gigawatts. We're talking about warehouses that are bigger than multiple football fields. In one case, Meta is famously building a multi-gigawatt data center that they claim will be almost the size of Manhattan. To me, the most surprising thing in my research is to learn that this isn't the only way to create AI systems, even though it seems like this is. AI can also be small enough to run on a laptop using small targeted data sets for things like helping doctors find abnormalities. This just makes sense. I've worked in Silicon Valley, and I feel like a very common piece of knowledge is that data out of any analysis or model is only going to be as good as your data in. So bad data in, it's going to be bad data out. Indeed, I think we can kind of draw a line to these 2 potential pathways to solving climate change through AI. Earlier, I mentioned this paper from Climate Change AI. They have a long list of problems that machine learning can really help with. Some examples of areas include remote sensing to assess damage after natural disasters, possibly find new materials for the clean energy transition, improving smart grids, improving climate modeling, and improving efficiencies in areas like freight shipping. So, those are all really important challenges. I want to point out that even in this paper, they say there's no such thing as a silver bullet, and that machine learning can actually be used to help or even harm climate, depending on how it's used. They emphasize that the quality of data inputs is critical, and that machine learning strategies are most effective when paired with strong policy. And there's also a very important footnote, which is one of the first things that perked my ears up, which is that it's worth noting that many machine learning methods cited in this article require only minimal energy to train and run. For instance, they can be run on a laptop or a phone. That's awesome. Let's do that. Now let's look at the chatbot Gen AI version of how we get to solving climate change. I actually couldn't find a compelling connection that the big tech industry has made themselves about why a chatbot can help with these big climate issues. I did find a very well-meaning, so no shade to this person, blog post from a safety researcher at OpenAI who's pretty well known, which discussed how ChatGPT and other AI technologies can help with the climate crisis. When talking about ChatGPT, everything it can help with is focused on language and communication. And then when talking about technological climate challenges, the language quickly shifts to AI and machine learning, which is subtly but not so subtly implying that we should loop ChatGPT in as the broad category of AI. But again, it's not specifically saying ChatGPT helps with that. So the only thing I can think of as how these companies think that we can solve climate change with AI is getting to what they have called artificial general intelligence, or like when AI is good enough to be better than a human or as smart as a human. Now, it's important to say that many in the industry believe that this is a faraway possibility or even impossibility. In one survey, for instance, of 475 AI researchers, 76% of them doubt that the current way that AI is being built is going to get us there, saying it's unlikely or very unlikely to succeed. Now, even if we did get there and AGI was achieved, okay, maybe it'll spit out some solutions to climate change and then we'll be back to square one. Like, we already, again, know the challenges to solving climate change. It's all about implementing it, which is going to take political and social will. And then are we going to implement it? Well, the scary thing to me is that maybe the implication is that we just are controlled and forced to do it by AI. Well, that sounds like a very scary possibility that I also don't want to happen. Even Eric Schmidt, who is a previous CEO of Google, who's very bullish about AI, wrote this article in the New York Times arguing that Silicon Valley is too focused on AGI and needs to focus on the challenges that we can really actually solve today. And the way that I've seen these companies operate doesn't really give me a lot of faith that it's going to be worth it. Like, is it worth the environmental damage of building a hyperscaler so that people can have virtual girlfriends? Some, like this article from AI Now, are calling this predatory delay. In other words, just trust me, bro. So imagine being in the early days of oil extraction or plastic production or big tobacco. Like, it'd be so much easier to solve the big challenges of today if we could have prevented the embedding of these technologies into our lives. And I believe we're there right now, and we still have time, with big tech's vision of AI. As they say, the best time to plant a tree was yesterday, and the second best time is today. And I believe that the best time to stop using chatbots was yesterday, but we can still do it today. Okay, I hope you're still with me. If you need to get a drink, please do it. This took me 3 months, okay? I'm trying to condense this into like an hour, so I really appreciate your time. Okay, so next, why do these companies need to grow this way? Allegedly. So as part of this research, I read this book that you might have heard of called Empire of AI by Karen Howe. It's a great book. It's a long book. It's dense. Basically, she was a journalist at MIT Tech Review and was following OpenAI from the very beginning. This book is a history of OpenAI as well as Sam Altman. So this book helped me to really understand the mindset of big tech AI and how we got to this point. ChatGPT is OpenAI is a very important, critical piece of this history and the way that the AI industry has built. We see OpenAI move from a nonprofit that was trying to prevent Silicon Valley from sort of tainting the promise of AI with the goal of reaching the most ethical AGI before any Silicon Valley types do. There's like a very existential sort of religious-like aspect to that belief. Supercharged Kool-Aid in Silicon Valley, very common. We see them having, at that time, multiple different projects they're working on. It was not obvious that a chatbot is the way that they're going to, supposedly get there. And they were not focused on making consumer products. And we also see them having like a very robust safety team, and that being important to making sure that they were building an ethical AI. Then we see them shift to becoming a for-profit company, and after seeing returns from ChatGPT, really chasing ChatGPT as their main product. We see them ignore their safety team repeatedly while still continuing to tout that the reason they need to win in the market is to get to that more ethical AGI. The book also frames big tech AI as a modern colonizing force, sucking up resources and exploiting low-cost labor in countries like Venezuela, Colombia, and Kenya. Quote, "The empires of AI are not engaged with the same overt violence and brutality that marked this history, but they too seize and extract precious resources to feed their vision of artificial intelligence, the work of artists and writers, the data of countless individuals posting about their experiences and observations online, the land, energy, and water required to house and run massive data centers and supercomputers. So too do the new empires exploit the labor of people globally to clean, tabulate, and prepare the data for spinning into lucrative AI technologies. They project tantalizing ideas of modernity and posture aggressively about the need to defeat other empires to provide cover for and to fuel invasions of privacy, theft, and the cataclysmic automation of large swaths of meaningful economic opportunities." In that book, I found a few other things alarming. She argues that OpenAI was a game changer, specifically that ChatGPT was a game changer and setting the pace of this new race, even pulling resources away from people who are working on specific problems, like in the medical field. She says, as Baidu raced to develop its ChatGPT equivalent, employees working to advance AI technologies for drug discovery had to suspend their research and cede their computer chips to develop the chatbot instead. The current AI paradigm is also choking off alternative paths to AI development. The number of independent researchers not affiliated with or receiving funding from the tech industry has rapidly dwindled, diminishing the diversity of ideas in the field, not tied to short-term commercial benefit. Indeed, even the incredible sums of money we see throwing around now in the AI space didn't happen until ChatGPT. Quote, not even in Silicon Valley did other companies and investors move until after ChatGPT to funnel unqualified sums into scaling. Second, scaling is not even necessarily the only way to improve performance. This speaks to the desire to dominate through building out at all costs, similar to empires eating land, labor, energy, and water. Quote, but scale is not the only pathway to improve performance. Within deep learning, the neglected paths of improving the neural network itself, or even the quality of training data, can significantly reduce the amount of expensive compute needed to reach the same performance. Lastly, these companies are actually eating trash data because they're so hungry for data to feed their models. And it's well known, again, bad data in means bad data out. So that's why sometimes you're probably seeing wrong answers. You're probably seeing, wonky things happening with the AI. OpenAI chose to feed low-quality data into each model after GPT-2. The first ChatGPT used GPT 3.5. We see that an internal safety team called Nest at OpenAI decided to use lower quality data. Quote, so Nest turned finally to a publicly available data set known as Common Crawl, a sprawling data dump with petabytes or millions of gigabytes of text, regularly scraped from all over the web. A source, Radford, a researcher, had purposefully avoided because it was such poor quality. In an effort to tame the trash in the data, the Nest team trained a machine learning model to find the samples within Common Crawl that looked most like articles on Wikipedia. If it looked like Wikipedia, the idea was it would be more likely to match Wikipedia quality. By the way, the trash data is the reason why people in poorer economies have been hired for pennies on the dollar to sort out the worst outputs of these chatbots. Things like violence, exploitation, really disturbing images, especially when image generation came around. We are shielded from them because of the efforts of these low-wage workers who have to train out the bad outputs. If AI didn't have this trash data, if it didn't have access to exploitative materials, then it wouldn't have those outputs in the first place. To me, this is one of the reasons why a model that sucks up all the information on the internet, including bad information, is not what's going to solve climate change. To do that, you need smaller, built-for-purpose models. Sarah Lucioni, a research scientist and climate lead at open source AI firm Hugging Face, which we'll talk about later, and also founder of Climate Change AI, says, quote, there are indeed many AI technologies as cataloged by the initiative turned nonprofit Climate Change AI that can accelerate sustainability, but rarely are they ever generative AI technologies. What you need for climate are supervised learning models or anomaly detection models or even statistical time series models. And this quote, when I read it in this book, kind of blew me away. That was like the most important quote in the book that really solidified things for me. On a micro scale, we see these companies competing with each other to get to AGI first. And in the book, in OpenAI's case, they continue to invoke the threat of Google coming out with a better model in order to overrun their safety teams so they can get there faster. I actually technically don't know if that kind of religious fervor is happening in these other companies. My guess is no, not really. But again, ChatGPT and OpenAI are setting the pace for a lot of what we see today. So on a micro scale, it's Google. On a macro scale, it's China. And so when you see these executives go to Congress, they're always invoking and fear-mongering that China is a massive threat and that one day they may get to AGI first. Time and time again, we see that a false choice is presented between safety and innovation. Eric Schmidt, who I mentioned earlier, says that if China comes to superintelligence first, it changes the dynamic of power globally in ways that we have no way of understanding or predicting. Okay, so all of that was actually just background. As you can see, there's a lot more left in this video. I haven't even really been talking about direct environmental and climate risk. So let's get into that. I'm going to sip my coffee first. Shout out to Meow Wolf. So the first thing is that AI is going to be sending us in unnecessary circles and wasting time when we know that climate change is an extremely pressing and urgent problem already. So let's take a small break and talk about where we are in climate progress, especially for those who don't work in climate, who may not know that we've made a ton of progress. If we look at the UN's last IPCC report from 2023, which is the AR6, which is, by the way, one of the most important climate documents. It's a report that takes scientists from around the world to basically make conclusions about where we are in the climate crisis, where we projected to go potentially, and it's all based on the best climate science at the time. In this last report, we see that we are likely to exceed 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. I would argue every 0.001 degree of warming is worth fighting for. Furthermore, the more warming we have, the more difficult it will be to mitigate the effects. In short, the timing to solve climate change is extremely pressing. We need to reach net zero CO2 emissions by 2050 in all of the model pathways that limit warming to 1.5. Furthermore, warming is already baked in. So CO2 that's out in the atmosphere lasts up there for hundreds of thousands of years. And that is actually something I don't think a lot of people appreciate, that we have what we call a bathtub problem. We have this big bathtub that's of CO2 that's very slowly draining. And the result is that about 40% of all the emissions we've ever emitted since the Industrial Revolution are still up there. And so that's why, for most of my young career, I've worked on carbon removal, which is drawing down the CO2 that's already in the atmosphere, which we need to do on top of just reducing emissions. It's notable also that the countries that are most responsible for these emissions are not the ones who are going to bear the brunt of climate change. And now those same countries are asking us to lengthen the amount of time we are going to spend before we solve climate change because of this AI boom. We've actually made dramatic progress on solving climate change. We've driven down the prices of renewables. So now new large-scale renewable plants are actually cost competitive with new fossil infrastructure. The U.S. Energy Information Administration was observing a decline in natural gas production in 2024. And what amounted to an essentially flat year for 2024 natural gas production. This aligns with the U.S. generally having flattened our energy needs over the past 20 years. But now, cheap natural gas prices and the need for 24/7 power have made natural gas a choice energy source for hyperscalers, though they're also technically looking at nuclear as a future option, but that's going to take a lot of time to build, and they're relying on certain nuclear technologies that don't exist today. The International Energy Agency, IEA, which is a 50-year-old intergovernmental organization analyzing global energy, predicts that natural gas will expand by 175 terawatt hours to meet growing data center demand, and only half of the demand in data centers will be met by renewables by 2035, due to short lead times, economic competitiveness, and the procurement strategy of tech companies. Nuclear was expected to contribute about the same amount of additional generation. Larry Fink, a prominent business figure and founder of BlackRock, said recently that 4 years ago, if someone were to build a data center, usually it's a given that they'd be powering it with renewables. 2 years ago, it was a preference. Today, they care about power. The need to win at all costs is an international thing as well. Recently, NVIDIA CEO Jensen Huang said in the UK, where electricity is 4 times higher than in the US, that natural gas is going to be needed to stay competitive. Data centers developers are already looking to connect Britain's gas pipelines and build their own gas-fired plants. Natural gas already accounts for half the electricity generated in Virginia, which is sort of the US capital of data centers. They have about 575 of them, and they have more data centers than any other state in the US. Today, data centers consume 25% of Virginia's electricity supply. And for 6 other states, that number is at least 10% already. And yes, if you're wondering, in some cases, we're also extending the life of coal for this AI boom. This is especially alarming considering that the fossil industry famously has disproportionately harmed marginalized communities, like low-income communities and Black and brown communities. This is evidenced by places such as Cancer Alley in Louisiana. This is Environmental Justice 101. In the AI space, we're already seeing this play out, for example, with xAI's now infamous plant Colossus, which is used to power Grok, where the plant is operating off of 33 gas turbines directly in a community that is predominantly Black and already is facing immense health issues, experiencing cancer rates 4 times the national average due to industrial contamination. Those turbines, by the way, are operating without ample permits and causing local pollution like NOx. This is an issue near and dear to me because I've worked on community benefits, and with the current administration's gutting of Biden-era environmental justice initiatives and also gutting protections for people for clean air and water, it's even more important for us as a climate community to pay attention to what's happening in the AI space and holding these companies accountable. The best trajectory of what we've been doing as a society to solve climate change is to electrify everything. basically shift from fossil fuels to infrastructure that can allow us to generate renewable electricity and use that as a source of electricity. That's why we're electrifying trains and electric vehicles, for instance. I have worked on turning electricity into liquid fuels for air travel. I say this because the amount of electricity, clean energy that these companies are competing for are only going to become more scarce for clean technologies who are trying to also use that renewable energy to shift away from fossil fuels. Furthermore, ratepayers are going to have to bear the brunt of this expansion, and we're already seeing this concern play out across the country. Ratepayers will have to pay for utilities to upgrade aging grid infrastructure and will bear a disproportionate share of infrastructure and maintenance costs, while data centers are getting subsidized rates and other electricity agreements from local governments who are trying to attract these companies to a locale. If there is a bubble, as others are saying, and these data centers become stranded assets, we will also have to pay for that. Just this month in California, Governor Newsom signed into law SB 57, which directs the California Public Utilities Commission to conduct a study on how much ratepayers may have to pay with data center proliferation. The second issue I see is that AI is pulling big tech away from their climate goals. And to their credit, I will say that big tech has been a corporate leader in environmental responsibility. Google has famously committed to 100% renewables in their operations and supply chain by 2030. Microsoft made a huge announcement to invest in carbon removal and become carbon negative across their entire history. This one is particularly important to me. As someone who worked in carbon removal way back in 2018, when this announcement came out, it was game-changing because no other big company had stuck out their necks to support this new industry, and the concept of carbon negativity or the concept of carbon removal was fairly less known. And now we're seeing that Microsoft and Google are both seeing, really large increases in their emissions, which they admit in their sustainability reports is because of AI and data center growth. However, they both continue to commit to these goals, and I want us to hold their feet to the fire on that. However, I will say that last May, Brad Smith, who's Microsoft president, told Bloomberg that its pledge to remove more carbon than it emits by the end of the decade is now much further away thanks to the AI boom. Furthermore, the internal changes happening at companies like Microsoft have people concerned. As Dwayne Tyndall, the executive director of environmental justice org Alternatives for Community and Environment, pointed out, Microsoft has laid off its DEI team. So why should we expect them to care about environmental justice impacts of technologies like AI? And yeah, I think this is hitting on a point that I feel like I'm implying, which is that can we really trust these big tech oligarchs to have our best interests at heart? And even if we do trust them, if we just look at their track record, we're seeing, and we will talk about this, that there's a lot of bad action happening already in the space, and AI is not even nearly as big as they want it to be. So in those sustainability reports, we see companies reporting their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. That's like direct emissions, energy use, and their emissions in their supply chain. I met a couple folks who are saying that actually is hiding a even bigger emission source, which is that these companies are servicing the oil and gas industry and enabling oil and gas to extract more than they would have before. One Microsoft press release specifically with a partnership with Exxon claims that their digital technologies are going to allow production growth by as much as 50,000 oil equivalent barrels per day. And this is before the big AI boom was even happening. Now, Google has pledged not to work with oil and gas, and this followed a Greenpeace report, Tech Companies Are Helping Big Oil Profit from Climate Destruction, which showed how Amazon, Google, and Microsoft are using AI and data centers to service the oil and gas industry. Amazon and Microsoft have not made similar moves. Indeed, AI has been called a game changer. If we just look at public statements by those in the oil and gas industry, it's allowing them to find more oil where it was once too difficult or expensive to develop. It's also speeding up offshore drilling. BP saying that it can take them weeks now with the help of AI to analyze seismic data versus months up to a year. And in a Wood Mackenzie press release detailing a proprietary AI software for oil and gas, they put out this astounding figure that this AI tool found an additional 470 billion to 1,000 billion or a trillion barrels. I actually sat down with one of these activists who founded the Enabled Emissions campaign about this. Here's my conversation with Holly Alpine.
I started at Microsoft back in 2014, right out of undergrad, and I was not in a sustainability role at the start. As my time progressed at Microsoft to do more and more sustainability related initiatives, I was part of the Microsoft's first zero waste cafe. I really led the push for that to happen, and various other sustainability initiatives. And part of that, what became a very large part of what I did was co-founding Microsoft's employee engagement program. So that was helping employees all over the world have sustainability part of their job, and grew that to over 10,000
Cool.
employees across 37 chapters around the world. I also founded Microsoft's data center community employee engagement program. So that was investing in sustainability solutions around the world. And I was very proud of those efforts. I loved my jobs, I loved my teams, but I also saw the company striking major deals with fossil fuel companies where Microsoft's most advanced tools, so that's cloud and IoT and AI, and not just AI, but this kind of suite of technology that was being used by these fossil fuel companies to expand oil and gas production. And that was pretty horrifying to me to see at this company that I believed in and was such a sustainability leader, that they were also helping the largest oil companies in the world, as well as a whole host of smaller companies, to dramatically increase production, which was dramatically increasing global fossil fuel or global carbon emissions, and really negating all of the good work that the company was doing many times over. So I worked internally for many years to make change, leading forums and memos and various calls with senior leaders, and eventually, I can talk more about that, but eventually decided that I needed to leave and found this program specifically, or this campaign specifically, on what we're calling enabled emissions. So the emissions that are enabled by the technology would not happen if not for this technology. And as I mentioned, there are great use cases for AI for
Yep.
sustainability. It's just, if we're looking at the use cases on one side, we have to look at the use cases on the other side. You have to look at, as you say, a clear-eyed view of how AI is impacting climate change and impacting our energy systems. And right now, it is doing far more to harm us than these nebulous, hypothetical, potential use cases in the future that will reduce emissions. It's been used for since its inception. Big oil has been some of the first
Mm-hmm.
users of all of these advances in technology, including machine learning and IoT. Like, they are some of the first and biggest users of the tech, and it is absolutely transforming the industry. Heidi, I cannot overstate the impact that is having on global emissions for these companies to be able to dramatically increase their production. Um, it is threatening and negating all global climate progress many times over, and it's currently not even part of the conversation around climate and AI. It's mostly focused on the positive use cases, and then the infrastructure side, so how it takes to power the technology and the data centers, and that absolutely should be addressed. That is just usually where the conversation stops, but that is the tip of the
Yeah.
iceberg. Tip of
Mm-hmm.
the iceberg when it comes to the actual climate impacts of the technology. Like, if you're addressing the climate impacts of the data centers, you're really addressing the climate impacts of buildings and infrastructure, but you're not actually addressing the climate impacts of tech. And
Mm-hmm.
the technology is
Interesting.
like what it's being used for. So we're trying to increase awareness and then address this issue. Totally. And it's pitched as like digital transformation, and that
Right.
sounds benign, but in practice, these tools help these companies increase exploration success, optimize their drilling, improve pipeline throughput, and cut their operating costs. We've seen by up to 10%. Basically, oil and gas production creates vast amounts of seismic and geospatial data that just using a human to be able to synthesize that and process it takes months and months. It's difficult. in the past, these companies would just buy vast swaths of land and just like start drilling and see what happens.
Mm.
Now they're able to very um, they're very able to optimize exactly where to drill and how, and so they have such a much higher success rate, so they're able to drop the amount of rigs that they're using but by like half, but increase production by like 3 times. So they use this seismic data to identify new drilling opportunities, and that's really expanding reserves. So the market language around that talks about the transition and being efficient, but you're being
Right.
more efficient to drill more oil. And
Yeah.
this business case is built on increasing oil and gas output today. And for the past decade, this is not a hypothetical, maybe in the future this tech can be used in that way. It has been used for this way
Hmm.
for the past 10 years, and it is only increasing, and it is, as I said, having dramatic impact on total production. So AI is just supercharging all of this. And now, even with Gen AI, it just unlocks a step change. Traditional AI already had efficiency gains, but being able to automate seismic analysis and predict well productivity and optimize your supply chains, even enabling new extraction methods. I mean, this is unlocking projects that would otherwise be too difficult or costly to do. Now they are viable. So that just means production is more profitable and it's more sustainable for fossil fuel companies that would otherwise be phased out, and not sustainable in an environmental sense, but in like a business sense. And
Yep.
without these AI capabilities, a lot of these projects would not happen. And with AI, they become viable. So that just means immense emissions that
Mm.
wouldn't have happened otherwise.
The last thing I will say about big tech is that money that was once going to clean tech and climate tech companies are now moving away because AI is way too shiny. I also say like the incentives have totally changed because of the current administration as well. One investor says that basically AI has sucked all the air out of the room, and now we see that these sort of tourist VCs are moving from climate, which was shiny, only a few years ago, and now we see that things have completely changed because AI is where everyone's chasing. And a very small percentage of the companies who are working on climate are even working on AI specific solutions. I've actually seen this play out in my personal life as someone who has spent many years encouraging people and helping people get climate jobs, which was actually something that was happening a lot over the past 5 years. There were tons of people coming to me wanting to find a climate job, and we saw things like the growth of climate job boards. Now, colleagues I know who worked on climate with me now have been going to AI companies because they just need a job and they can't find those climate jobs anymore. And obviously, there's no shade about going to an AI company because you need a job and that's where the jobs are. This is more about the systemic problems that are happening in the climate space. This is just the more recent example of what I've called the brain drain that big tech has away from really important problems like climate problems. Big tech continues to just suck away talent that could be solving really, really big, important existential issues. Okay, you can watch the sun go down in my little space here. All right, we're gonna get into a sunny topic, not literally not sunny topic, as you can guess, but let's talk about how AI is directly already enabling harm. The way that they're building out their hyperscalers is already causing harm to local communities, as we kind of just alluded to. Basically, like the best way to build an infrastructure project is to make sure that the community has buy-in and that they're actually getting benefits from you putting something in their community, and that you're doing things like providing really good jobs that are long-term jobs, not just construction jobs, that you're making sure that you're not polluting that community. The bar seems very low. It should not be this low. And that you're reporting out to them that you're not polluting the community. It's already sort of uncommon for companies to do that in general. Even in the climate space that I was in, that was something that wasn't necessarily the norm, except there was a initiative by the federal government during the Biden era that basically tied grant funding to having community benefits plans, and that's something I worked on. But those don't exist anymore. So anyway, I'm not surprised that AI companies are basically steamrolling communities to build their hyperscale plants. And in some case, they're even hiding their name and being kind of secretive and not even holding like town halls with community members. We know of a few bad examples. We just talked about Elon Musk plants in Memphis. An example in Empire of AI, again, is where, quote, the environmental ministry revealed that Google's data center planned to use 2 million gallons of water a day directly from the drinking water supply, equivalent to the daily water consumption of 55,000 people, with much of Montevideo receiving salt water in their taps not long after the revelations were explosive. There are stories of people in this book where low-wage workers are being asked to do horrific work to weed out and train the AIs to not generate horrible material, and it affects people directly, the mental health of the people in these countries who are making very little money and really don't have a lot of options. Lastly, these companies have censored critique. For instance, a famous example is Dr. Timnit Gebru, who was famously let go from Google after publishing a paper that was calling out AI's potential to be biased and cause social harm, under the guise of not doing it with full approval from Google. This, to me, echoes how Exxon knew that scientists decades ago within Exxon brought to executives that the emissions of burning their fossil fuels would cause harm. I'm a firm believer that these companies are made up of just people who just want to have a good life and a good job. And I posit that if you are pro AI, wouldn't you want it to be the best quality possible and cause the least harm possible? It seems that this industry has decided that harm is a necessary side effect because so much is flowing. I believe we need regulation because I don't see these companies being good actors on their own. And I ask to you, if you're in the field, wouldn't you want those bad actors to have accountability and not basically give your entire industry a bad name? And to climate people, I pose to you that harming marginalized communities on the way to solving climate change is not solving climate change. Next, let's talk about how AI amplifies our existing social issues that already put us at climate risk. Another thing that I've said before is that my concern about climate change playing out in its worst forms is not that humanity ends when we let the seas slowly rise. It's from us fighting each other and conflict happening in more resource scarcity, warfare, things like that, blowing each other up. And so it is alarming to me when militarization and fascism and authoritarianism are increasing, when isolation from each other and the lack of personal connection are increasing. And I want to say that the astounding growth of AI bringing about more surveillance, enabling warfare, and pushing isolation from each other are real climate risks. Furthermore, we already know a lot of these technologies are not ready, so why can we trust them to basically make life or death decisions? In particular, I'm concerned about the rise of deepfakes when climate misinformation is already rampant and division in our societies are already so extreme. I always say, like, it's very common when you work in climate to pay attention to conspiracies, because to work on climate change is to work on something that some people find very controversial. Well, man, is the misinformation just going to get worse? I mean, image generators are getting better and better to a scary degree. I think our brains are not ready for Gen AI. We have a billionaire class that's just profiting off of the division that we already have in society. Already, deepfakes are being used to muddy the truth in elections, and even when those deepfakes were pretty obvious, they were widely shared. I think that our confirmation biases fill in the blanks for us, even when our eyes see something that's a little bit off. On a positive note, alongside Empire of AI, I read Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Mary Brown, who is an author, an activist, a poet, an artist, and it's about basically how do we organize ourselves, learning from nature to build towards a better healed society, which feels like such a far off thing nowadays. I really liked that she references a framework by Movement Generation out here in Oakland, and she talks about shocks and slides. Shocks present themselves as acute moments of disruption, and slides, on the other hand, are incremental by nature. She says, one of our key roles as social movements must be to harness the shocks and direct the slides, all towards achieving the systemic, cultural, and psychic shifts we need to navigate the changes with the greatest equity, resilience, and ecological restoration possible. And I think that is just a beautiful way to frame personally why I'm scared of the rise of big tech AI because it's kind of taking us away from all those things. It's profiting off of our isolation from each other. It is pulling us away from building communities in real life, and strong communities is what we need to fight this division that's happening to us. We need to move towards nature and towards each other, not moving away from nature and away from each other. Okay, last and finally, we can talk about direct resource use. Okay, let's talk about electricity first. I would be okay if these data centers are powered with 100% renewable, and the communities there wanted them there, and they didn't pollute water systems, and that they were reporting metrics regularly, so we knew we were building towards like a more sustainable future. Obviously, you can guess that's not what's happening. Today I'm not going to talk about like what one individual query spends energy and water-wise. I think that's more focused on individual behavior, which doesn't really work for a lot of people, and the numbers are actually quite small compared to, like, if you look at it in aggregate. Like, we have a world where there are 1 billion queries happening on ChatGPT on a daily basis, and all of those things added up, and the plans moving forward that big tech wants to build out these hyperscalers with, those numbers are the ones that are most scary to me. So first, as a baseline, it's important to note that data centers before AI were so efficient that data center energy use remained pretty steady, even with the dawn of streaming. And then 2017 happened and things started to change. And the reason is because AI runs on GPUs. They run on these graphics processing units, which are designed for rapid parallel processing. And those require a greater need for electricity and therefore also a greater need for cooling. This is in comparison to CPUs, like what's in our laptop. In a report by the UN's Agency for Digital Technologies, International Telecommunication Union, electricity consumption by data centers increased by 12% yearly from 2017 to 2023, which is 4 times faster than global electricity growth. According to the IEA, in 2024, data centers accounted for about 1.5% of world energy consumption, which is about 415 terawatt hours. Even if you think it's small, which I don't think is small because the numbers we're talking about are massive, it's just the beginning. It's, again, the immense planned growth that's more worrisome, as data centers are primed to be one of the fastest growing emission sources. Today, energy is actually a primary constraint for AI growth. The Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, the DOE's national lab here in Berkeley, put out an often cited paper recently that projects that by 2028, the share of electricity in the US going to data centers may triple from 4.4% to 12%. And in that time, the power going to AI specific purposes will rise to 326 terawatt hours per year, which is more than electricity used for all data centers today and enough to power 22% of US households. Another often cited figure is from the IEA. Again, shout out to the IEA, which estimates that data center energy consumption globally will double by 2030, which is largely driven by the US and followed by China. The estimate puts that number at least 1,200 terawatt hours by 2035. And they only anticipate that half of that will be supplied by renewable energy by 2030. Natural gas, followed by nuclear and geothermal, will fill in the rest. If we look at emissions, they're projecting emissions to grow from 180 million tons today to 300 million tons in the base case by 2035, and then 500 megatons, or half a gigaton in the liftoff case. As a rule of thumb, we put about 40 gigatons of CO2 into the atmosphere annually, so half a gigaton is about 1.25% of our emissions. To put that in perspective, aviation is 2.5% of our emissions and widely regarded as an industry we need to decarbonize. Again, these emissions can also grow beyond that because that's just looking at the next 5 years. 5 years. 5 years to get us to 1.5%. That is pretty astounding. Humanity has already reached record CO2 emissions last year, and we're going to blow way past the Paris Agreement with this kind of growth. Okay, I want to point out that in this report, they say that data center demand will be about 10% of global electricity demand growth by 2030, still less than industrial motors, air conditioning in homes and offices, or electric vehicles. And I think it's really funny when stats like this come up because it's like, yeah, my house is on fire, and if if another room is on fire, it's still a problem. Those are all serious problems that climate people are very concerned about. And I don't know, this kind of statement is really funny because I think it's supposed to make us feel like, oh, it's not that bad. But those are all bad. Lastly, I haven't given enough love to Amazon. I want to say that their data center use is like blowing everyone out of the water. They're on pace to have the highest electricity demand, 30 to 48 terawatt hours a year, and Microsoft is the second one, and they're quite far behind. All right, let's talk about water. Cooling needs have become more intense because energy needs are more increased thanks to the shift in this infrastructure that we just talked about. One expert said that with so many high-powered chips squashed together, air cooling, like big fans, is no longer sufficient. Water has become the go-to coolant because it's better than air at whisking heat away. The chips inside servers suck up around 45% of the power in a data center, but cooling those chips now takes almost as much power on 40%. So thermal management is becoming the gate to expansion of this AI infrastructure. The result is obviously an incredible amount of water use, and we see that big tech companies are massively increasing their water use. I don't see Amazon on this list. I would love to see what Amazon looks like here. Furthermore, 2/3 of data centers that are being built in the US since 2022 are in areas with high water stress, and that mirrors a trend globally. Here's a map that I found that shows how widespread the problem is that data centers are being built in water scarce areas. Another real issue here is that companies are just not transparent. And an organization, Hugging Face, that I mentioned earlier, is pushing the industry to disclose more. In Empire of AI, Hal writes, in 2023, Stanford researchers would create a transparency tracker to score AI companies on whether they revealed even basic information about their large, deep learning models, such as how many parameters they had, what data they were trained on, and whether there had been any independent verification of their capabilities. All 10 of the companies they evaluated in the first year, including OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic, received an F. The highest score was 54%, and it appears that these companies are only getting less transparent over time. Next, let's talk about mineral extraction, and in addition, the competition we're going to see between climate technologies directly with AI. The rise of hyperscalers are only going to put more stress on the mining industry for precious metals that are already causing human rights abuses across the world. I listened to this really great talk that I'll link here, and I recommend you go read it. I've really opened my eyes to this problem. In that talk, the intro says that AI data centers will need 1 million metric tons of copper by 2030. And each EV will actually need 4 times more copper than a traditional car. We already know that places like the Democratic Republic of the Congo are absolutely rife with human rights abuses, conditions that can only be defined as modern-day slavery and child labor, all in the name of giving us precious metals for electric vehicles, for our phones, our technology, and now soon, AI-centered data centers. Essentially, minerals are already a massive human rights problem, and both adults and children are being massively exploited in these areas that have these precious metals. In the DRC, we are taking copper and cobalt, both used in clean energy and electronics. One researcher says that although the DRC has more cobalt reserves than the rest of the planet combined, there's no such thing as a clean supply chain of cobalt from the country. Cobalt is mined by artisanal miners, who are freelance workers who do dangerous labor for the equivalent of just a few dollars a day. AI will only make this worse. Materials such as gallium, which is crucial for computing chips and power electronics, are expected to skyrocket, reaching more than 10% of the current supply by 2030. China accounts for 99% of global refined gallium supply. In the current geopolitical environment, I can only imagine what kind of conflict could happen when we start fighting over rare minerals. How will this play out among nations? And more importantly, how will this play out among the people of those nations? Okay, so that's it for the doom and gloom. Let's talk about where AI can help climate. I've been super heartened to see so many wonderful efforts happening in the AI space to make AI more ethical. I mentioned Hugging Face. They are working to create more accountability and transparency from these big tech companies and have developed a standardized approach to test different models and specifically looking at their energy use. They have a leaderboard. Right now, the leaderboard has a 60,000-ish times difference between like the lowest and the highest energy use for each model. And it's notable that Sasha Lucioni, who we mentioned earlier, said that closed AI model providers have yet to submit their in-production models for testing or share this data. So those currently can't really be compared, and they're continuing to not be transparent. So hopefully tools like this can help push them to be so. Second, I mentioned climate change AI a couple times. Very cool efforts to promote focused tools to help solve climate change with AI. I mentioned Dr. Timnit Gebru, who is the founder of Black and AI and leading the Decentralized AI Research Institute, DARE. They are working on many different ways to make AI more ethical. And then lastly, I want to mention the small AI and the slow AI movements, thinking about and making moves towards a different way of building out these technologies, one that is more human-centered and even moving with the flows of the earth. I was particularly moved by a wonderful zine flipbook by AI X Design about this, about small AI. I actually sat down with Nadia Nadesan, who is the lead researcher for the Small AI project. I'm very excited to post that conversation. Because this is coming at the end of the video, and I know we're winding down, I figured it'd be better to put it in a separate video, and I hope you come back to watch the rest. I wanted to read a quote from a blog post about slow AI. Quote, "Slow AI is not an anti-AI concept, but rather a call for those developing, using, and overseeing AI to do so deliberately and responsibly so that it is fair, transparent, and beneficial for all. A slow AI approach can help minimize job losses and economic inequality by ensuring that AI skills are broadly shared across the society and that AI tools are developed to assist humans rather than replace them. It could also mean ethical considerations are embedded across AI development, from choosing diverse development teams to involving ethicists in data collection, model training, development, and monitoring." And I wanted to share a couple of quotes from the flipbook. One is from Michael Runningwolf, founder of Indigenous in AI, who said, "If you go into a community with a mindset that data is just a resource, a monetary valuable thing, you're fundamentally harming the community, and you're also diminishing the value of this data." And lastly, a quote from Dr. Timnit Gebru, "There is a push for generality in machine learning. I'm totally against that. We have to work context by context, community by community." Lastly, let's talk about what good looks like. This form of AI is not inevitable, and we don't have to believe these big tech oligarchs when they tell us we're going to be left behind if we don't get on this train. I mean, we laughed at the metaverse, and none of us are on there, right? We can do the same kind of thing with these chatbots. And I already feel like it's kind of cringe to use AI art in a lot of our spaces. So yeah, more of that. It's also notable that a lot of Americans are already concerned. Pew Research showed that most Americans are more concerned than excited about AI. All over the country, there's just been massive pushback on these massive data centers because of the concerns we talked about before, potential rate hikes, environmental pollution, noise pollution, running backup generators in those communities. These are all concerns that a lot of people have. People don't want billionaires to be meddling in their way of life, and that's something we can all get behind. It's a very bipartisan movement. I'll mention that just before the Big Beautiful Bill passed, they removed the clause that would have banned AI regulation by the states because a Republican senator, Marsha Blackburn, who's from Tennessee, where there is AI legislation about stealing the likeness and music of musicians. I had made a short video about this and looked into it months ago, and I feel like what I gathered from that is that people don't want children to be exploited. They don't want big tech oligarchs to take over their communities. People are really worried about the social effects of these types of technologies. They're really not sure how it's going to affect education, mental health. They especially don't want children to be endangered, and that's still something we can all get behind. Actually, over the past 2 years, projects worth $64 billion have been canceled or delayed by public opposition, according to research group Data Center Watch, and the blowback is bipartisan. 55% of the public officials opposing new data centers are Republicans. Locally, we can push for accountability. Indeed, almost every state has something in motion. There are so many legislators across the country who are trying to push for regulation. I call on us to work towards a world where technologies work with us, not against us, and at the pace of necessity, and not at the speed of the hype cycle. One where we have leaders across many disciplines who get to control the narrative, not just a few tech bros who are pushing their vision of this technological future onto us. We can also be choosy about which kind of AI tools we use, and we can ask questions when our employer is trying to push a new AI tool onto us. We can ask questions like, who's going to be accountable if something goes wrong? How are we measuring the success of this tool? What are we trying to get out of this tool? Is the company behind this polluting local communities? Is it aligned with our values? I also think we can use better language to talk about the types of AI that are good and the ones that are less good. We could use the term big tech AI. That's the one I posed here. But I'm sure the AI community has other ideas about what kind of language to use, but I do think that everything being AI is really only serving the big tech oligarchs. I hope if you're a person who cares about climate change or a person of conscience, you've learned something from this video and that is helpful to you. And if you are a person who wants to work on climate, please work directly on it. Don't just go work on an AI company who's telling you that maybe in 10, 20 years we will solve it because we've found superintelligence. Hope this starts a conversation and would love to hear your thoughts about what else we should talk about. If there's anything in here that I missed, please let me know. I hope this video is able to provide a service towards the ends of solving climate change for real. Lastly, I want to say I did not use any AI for this video, and yeah, I think we should normalize saying that because maybe the climate does depend on it.